February 3, 1945. 1:58 p.m. Rotter, Luxembourg. Staff Sergeant Elliot Eddie Marlowe turns the corner of a half-collapsed barn and stops so fast his boots skid on packed snow. Because 73 German soldiers are staring straight at him. Some are already holding rifles. Others are bending over a pile of captured weapons, loading magazines with hands that don't look like prisoners anymore. In the snow beside them, 3 American GIs kneel with their hands behind their heads. These Germans were prisoners 20 minutes ago. Captured during the fight for this village, herded into a yard, guarded by the only men Marlowe could spare. Now they're free, armed, and reorganizing. A German officer steps forward, face raw with cold and anger, and jams a Schmeisser MP40 into Marlowe's stomach like it's a signature. He barks a command in German. Marlowe doesn't speak German. None of the Americans do. The officer screams again. Louder. Spittle freezes on his lip.
Marlowe looks at the 73 Germans, looks at the kneeling Americans, looks at the MP40 pressed into his gut, and then he does something that makes no sense. He starts laughing. Not a chuckle, not a nervous smile, a full, shaking laugh that sounds wrong in a winter war. The German officer freezes, confused, then enraged. He shouts again. Marlowe laughs harder. What happens next takes less than 60 seconds. 17 Germans will die. Most of the rest will throw down their weapons and surrender, and Elliot Marlowe will earn the Medal of Honor for one of the strangest, most violent reversals of fate in the European War. Not because he was the biggest man, not because he was the best shot, but because for one impossible minute, he kept thinking while everyone else stopped. Calm, authoritative WWII documentary narration. Elliot Marlowe was born May 14, 1917, in Johnstown, Pennsylvania, a town built on steel, soot, and the kind of work that makes your hands older than your face. He grew up during the long shadow of the Depression. By high school, he was already doing 2 jobs, one for money, one for family. He wasn't loud, he wasn't charming, he was steady, the kind of man you forget is in the room until something breaks and he's the one holding it together. In March 1942, the draft reaches him. He reports in at Altoona, 24 years old, 5'6", 150 pounds, built like a store clerk. The examining doctor looks him over and probably thinks supply depot, paperwork, safe work. He's wrong. Marlowe volunteers for the Airborne. In 1942, jumping behind enemy lines is still a new religion, and the men who join it are the first converts. Airborne training is designed to humiliate your body until your mind stops arguing. Weeks of running, obstacle courses, falls that teach you how to hit the ground without dying. Then the towers, then the aircraft. The first time you stand in a door at 1,000 feet, wind tearing at your face, your instincts scream, "Don't." But the Airborne lives on a simple faith. You go anyway. Marlowe earns his jump wings and is assigned to Company B, 2nd Battalion, 507th Parachute Infantry Regiment, a unit that will soon learn that elite doesn't mean safe. By late 1943, they're in England. By spring 1944, they're rehearsing for a night jump into the largest invasion in human history. And Marlowe, quiet, older than most of the boys around him, becomes the man people drift toward when the world gets loud.
June 6,
1944, 12:52 a.m. The C-47 shakes like it's being punched from the outside. Flak bursts are blooming in the darkness, black flowers. Marlowe stands in the stick line with 60 pounds of gear strapped to his body. Thompson's submachine gun, ammo, grenades, first aid kit, rations. They're too low. The pilots can't climb. Red tracers stitch past the windows like something alive. Then, the green light. He jumps. The prop blast hits him like a moving wall. And then, silence. A parachute turns war into a quiet, floating nightmare. Below him is France, occupied, hostile, enormous. The drop is chaos. Planes scattered, sticks dropped in the wrong fields, men landing in flooded ditches and drowning under equipment, others landing in the middle of German positions and dying before they can cut free. Marlowe hits hard. His knee twists, not shattered, but damaged enough that every step becomes a negotiation with pain. He buries his parachute and moves. He's far from the drop zone, alone. And within hours, other paratroopers begin to appear like ghosts, lost men from other units, drawn by the same instinct: find a leader. Marlowe collects them, not with speeches, with decisions. For 8 days he leads a mixed group, 12 men, through hedgerows and villages, moving at night, hiding by day, avoiding firefights they don't need. When they have to fight, he puts himself forward as point scout, not because he's fearless, because he's careful. On June 14th, they reach Allied lines. 12 men went in with him. 12 men come out. No casualties. The army gives him a decoration and a handshake, but the real reward is simpler. He learns something about himself. When the plan collapses, he doesn't. September 1944. The Airborne drops into the Netherlands. Bridges, canals, flat land that offers nowhere to hide. The plan is big. The reality is bigger. After landing, Marlowe's company secures its immediate objective. And then he sees something that isn't on any map. A dug-in German flak position, 2 20mm guns, hammering the sky where Allied gliders are coming in. Gliders full of men, ammo, medics, radios. If those guns keep firing, bodies will hit the ground before the gliders do. Marlowe has 2 men with him. Doctrine says you need numbers. Marlowe does not have numbers. He has urgency. They crawl forward through ditches and wet grass. They get close enough to smell cordite. Then they rush. 1 grenade, a burst of Thompson fire, a shout that isn't meant to be heard, only to be felt. They overrun the position, knock the guns out, and vanish back into cover before a larger force can react. The gliders land. Hundreds of men live because 3 men decided to ignore the math. Marlowe earns a high decoration for it. But decorations don't keep you warm. Winter is coming. And the Germans are about to make one last desperate move. December 1944. The offensive hits like a fist through thin glass. Snow. Ice. Fog so thick aircraft can't fly. The roads choke with refugees and trucks and wounded men. The cold is its own enemy. Weapons jam. Engines refuse to start. Fingers go numb on triggers. And then news spreads through the lines. A massacre. A group of American prisoners executed in the snow after surrendering. Different units hear different numbers. Different men tell it in different voices. But they all agree on what it means. The war is no longer polite. Marlowe hears it, and something hardens. Not rage, not panic, a decision. He tells the men closest to him the only sentence that matters. If they put a gun on you, you don't wait to find out what kind of German it is. He doesn't say it dramatically. He says it like a fact. And that decision is going to meet him in a farmyard at 1:58 p.m. on February 3rd.
By late January 1945, the German offensive is breaking. Now the Allies push back through villages that look like broken teeth. Company B is under strength. Too many men lost, too many wounded, too many sick from frostbite. Their lieutenant is gone. Their senior NCOs are stretched thin. Marlowe is acting platoon sergeant, running men who are exhausted, half-fed, and carrying weapons that feel heavier every day. They get orders to clear Roeder, a cluster of houses and barns along a frozen road. The fight is close and dirty, room to room, grenade to grenade. They capture a large group of Germans, over 60, and herd them behind a barn. Marlowe looks at his depleted roster. He can spare only 3 guards. "Keep them here," he says. "We'll get more men when we can." Then he goes back into the village to finish the job. He doesn't know what's happening behind him. A German patrol approaches in white winter capes, blending into snow like moving shadows. In the confusion, the guards don't realize they're enemy until it's too late. They're disarmed, forced to kneel. The prisoners are freed. Weapons are passed out from the pile, and suddenly the Germans have a second chance and a plan. Hit Company B from the rear while Americans are scattered through houses. A rear attack in a village fight isn't a skirmish, it's a massacre. And then Marlowe, checking on the prisoners out of habit, rounds the corner of the barn and sees it all. 73 Germans, 3 kneeling Americans, and an officer stepping forward with a submachine gun. The MP-40 presses into Marlowe's stomach. German words explode into his face. Marlowe doesn't understand them. The officer screams louder. Marlowe looks at the gun, looks at the officer's eyes, and for 1 second the world becomes absurd. A man shouting orders in a language you don't speak, as if language itself is a weapon. And Marlowe starts laughing. The officer's expression falters. The Germans behind him shift. Some grin, some look unsure. The laughter does something that bullets can't. It breaks the expected shape of the moment. This is not how a man behaves when he's about to die, and uncertainty on a battlefield is a crack. Marlowe uses the crack. Still laughing, still selling the performance, he reaches up slowly toward his Thompson, slung high on his shoulder. The German officer watches, suspicious but greedy. Yes, take the weapon off, surrender like a good prisoner. Marlowe slides the sling, slow and careful. The officer relaxes by a fraction. That fraction is everything. Marlowe's laugh dies mid-breath. His hands move once, clean, fast, practiced. He brings the Thompson down, levels the muzzle, and fires. The first burst hits the officer at point-blank range. He drops as if his strings were cut. Marlowe pivots and keeps firing into the tight cluster of Germans nearest him. Men stumble, fall, drop weapons. Snow jumps into the air in dirty bursts. The Thompson runs dry. This is the moment where most men die, because reload time is eternity. Marlowe slams in a fresh magazine with hands that have done it 1,000 times in training. He racks the bolt, and he screams, not at the Germans, but at his own men. "Take their guns! Take their guns!" The guards surge forward, grabbing rifles from dropped hands, arising from prisoners into fighters in one breath. German soldiers, suddenly leaderless, are trapped in confusion. Some fire back wildly. Bullets crack past Marlowe's head. One American goes down. Marlowe doesn't stop, because the second he fired the first burst, he traded his life for momentum. There's no surrender after that. There's only one outcome: kill them or be killed. The guards are firing now. A couple of Americans from nearby buildings hear the gunfire and rush toward the barn. The Germans realize too late that the moment has flipped. They were about to be hunters.
Now they're targets. In less than a minute, it's over. 17 German soldiers lie dead in the snow. More are wounded. And then, like a switch, hands go up, weapons clatter down. The prisoners become prisoners again. Marlowe stands in the yard with smoke curling from his gun, breath hogging, ears ringing, alive when he should have been a statistic, and he says, almost calmly, "That was the dumbest thing I've ever seen."
Roeder is secured. This time, the prisoners are marched to the rear under heavy guard. Marlowe's officers hear the story and don't argue about what it means. Because whatever you call it, reckless, brilliant, insane, it worked. The recommendation goes up the chain. By the time it reaches the highest levels, the story has already traveled faster than paperwork ever could. The sergeant who laughed at 70 men and turned them back into prisoners. In late 1945, after the war ends, Marlowe is brought to Washington. A medal is placed around his neck. Cameras flash. Handshakes, speeches, a moment that feels like a different universe from a snowy yard in Luxembourg. And like many men who do extraordinary things, Marlowe does not become a celebrity. He doesn't write a memoir. He doesn't tour the country giving speeches about courage. He goes home to Pennsylvania and takes a job that looks ordinary from the outside. He works. He marries. He raises children. The medal sits in a case somewhere. When people ask him about Roeder, about the laughing, he shrugs. Did what I had to do. That's all. Because the men who survive war often don't want to live inside it forever. War doesn't belong to the biggest, or the loudest, or the men who feel nothing. War favors the ones who can still think when the world collapses into noise. At 1:58 p.m. on February 3rd, Elliot Marlowe had every reason to surrender. Outnumbered, gun in his stomach, his men kneeling. The math said he was dead. But Marlowe wasn't thinking about math. He was thinking about what happens when you surrender to men who don't respect surrender. He was thinking about his guards on their knees. He was thinking about the Americans scattered through the village who would be shot from behind. So he laughed, maybe as a tactic, maybe from stress, maybe because death sometimes looks absurd up close. And while the enemy officer tried to understand the laughter, Marlowe moved. A minute later, he was alive. And 73 men who thought they were about to win a village were back where they started, with their hands up. Because courage isn't size. Courage is what you do when there's a gun in your stomach, and the next minute decides who gets to go home.